An important thing that most sensible people agree on is that Nazis are awful people who should always be fought against. Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists reached the height of their power in Germany only 80 years ago. It's hard to believe, but the effects of their violent and racist rise are still being felt today. It could have been so much worse because the Nazis were doing more than one thing at once. They weren't just trying to take over the world and kill millions of people. They were also building what they called a 1,000-year Reich. The Hitler Youth were an important part of laying the groundwork for that. The phrase still makes me think of cute, brainwashed kids happily taking in Nazi ideas. People should remember that our kids are what society makes them, and if society fills them with hate, lies, and a burning love for Nazi uniform fashion, then everyone pays a very high price. The word Hitler Youth is still used to refer to any young person with fascist views, but most of us don't know much about the group or how the Nazis used it to further their terrifying goals. It was a scary, well-thought-out plan until it fell apart in violent chaos, just like everything else the Nazis did. Here's what you don't know about the Hitler Youth. The Nazis knew the children are the future. We can see that the Nazis were crazy when we look back at history. Their mix of racism, occultism, nationalism, and other crazy isms wasn't really a philosophy. It was more of a grand, unified conspiracy theory that drew in some really strange people. Seriously, if you look at the Nazi high command, you'll see a group of deviants, crazy people, and other weirdos that you would normally never see in a position of power. They did have a plan, though. The people who worked with Adolf Hitler knew a lot about some things. That's how they got power in the first place. Time says that the Hitler Youth have been a part of their long-term plans from the start. From the very start of the Nazi Party in the 1920s, to be exact. That's because Hitler and the rest of the Nazis knew they had to change the way people thought in order to stay in power. BBC Bitesize says that the Nazis only got 36.8% of the national vote in the 1932 election, but Hitler was made Chancellor the next year. They thought the Hitler Youth was important for making sure that as older Germans died off and younger ones took their place, they would keep more and more of the people's hearts and minds. The Hitler Youth seized control. One thing you have to give the Nazis credit for is that they always insisted that violence and excessive force were the best ways to solve problems. This included the problem of youth groups in Germany fighting with each other in the 1930s. Time says that joining the Hitler Youth was at first optional, and Germany had about 400 other youth clubs. The Reich's Committee of German Youth Associations, RCGYA, spoke for these groups and looked out for the 6 million German kids who were active in different groups. One of Baldur von Schirach's goals as Hitler Youth leader was to get rid of these other youth groups that were fighting with the Hitler Youth and make the Hitler Youth the only group for all German children. Just like always, the Nazis said, brute force. As told by the History Place, 50 Hitler Youth stormed the offices of the RCGYA on April 13, 1933. Workers were told that they should keep doing their jobs even though they were now being watched over by the Hitler Youth. By just breaking into a Berlin office building with a group of kids in uniform, von Schirach quickly took over every youth group in the country. Other youth groups were shut down, but not the Catholics. The Hitler Youth started to get rid of the competition as soon as they took over the Reich's Committee of German Youth Associations and the hundreds of youth groups it was in charge of. The History Place said that this was easier than it might have seemed because many of those youth groups were happy to become part of the Hitler Youth. Different strategies were used against those who didn't want to change. Jewish and communist groups were attacked, and most of the time they gave up and shut down rather than face what would happen if they didn't give up. Some groups' buildings were broken into, and the Nazis told the police that certain groups couldn't meet because they were a nuisance to the public. Most of the youth groups in the country went away in just a few months. For a while, the only ones who weren't were Catholic church-run groups. America magazine said that Adolf Hitler had reached a deal with the Catholic Church. This was possible because many high-ranking Nazis were Catholic. The deal meant that the church could keep their youth groups going while other groups had to close. In fact, a lot of Hitler Youth wore their outfits under their robes when they worked as altar boys. The Hitler Youth were based on the Boy Scouts. You're not the only one who has ever seen a group of Boy Scouts standing at attention in their cool outfits and thought they looked a bit like fascists. Yes, the Nazis agreed with you. In fact, when they were putting together the Hitler Youth, they looked to the Boy Scouts for ideas. According to history, the Nazis officially banned the Boy Scouts in 1936. This was part of their plan to get all German kids to join the Hitler Youth or a group that was similar. While the Hitler Youth started out, they were a lot like the Boy Scouts. They copied many of their traditions and programs. Like the Scouts, the Hitler Youth wore uniforms and said vows. They also went on camping and hiking trips and learned how to do crafts and use the outdoors. A report from The Independent said that before the Scouts were banned, the Hitler Youth even got in touch with Lord Robert Baden-Powell, who started the Boy Scouts, and got a warm reaction. The Nazis wanted to form an alliance with the Scouts. They linked the idea to a unified youth movement that would help keep the peace between England and Germany. Baden-Powell was open to the idea, but the Nazis had him on a list of people who would be arrested if Germany ever invaded Great Britain. He afterward praised Adolf Hitler and seemed to agree with Nazi ideas. Membership was voluntary for a while. Patients were one way the Nazis took full control of a country where they never got the support of the majority of voters. Often they made changes and restrictions slowly, giving each stage time to become the new normal before going on to the next. That's exactly what the Nazis did with the Hitler Youth, as Time describes. The group was started in the 1920s, but there were already hundreds of other youth groups in the country at that time. Even after the Nazis took over and started shutting down other youth groups, joining the Hitler Youth was still up to the individual. It wasn't until 1936 that the group became a state body, and every child in Germany had to be a part of a Hitler Youth group. History Extra says that by 1939, 82% of German children were members of the Hitler Youth, making it the biggest youth group in the world. The Hitler Youth had to be rebuilt to handle the large number of kids. The Jungvolk was made for boys under 14, and the Jungmadel was made for girls. After that, boys joined the Hitler Youth, and girls joined the Bund Deutscher Madel, which means League of German Girls. Your parents could be fined or even sent to jail if you didn't join. You could end up in a re-education camp. There weren't enough leaders. After all children were required to join in 1936, the Hitler Youth grew very quickly. By 1939, 82% of Germany's children were members. But this huge increase in membership caused a big problem. There weren't enough trained adult leaders to watch over all those kids and make sure they were learning Nazi ideas the right way. The history place said that there weren't enough trained adult leaders to handle the people, and many of those leaders didn't have the skills needed for the militaristic and physically demanding program run by the Hitler Youth. This problem was made worse by the fact that some of the leaders brought in from closed youth groups weren't reliably Nazi enough. Germany's people never really agreed with the Nazis. There were many people who didn't join the party and didn't agree with their crazy view of the world. There was a lot of worry among the Hitler Youth that some anti-Nazi ideas might get mixed in with their propaganda. As scholar Alessio Ponzio points out, the answer was to set up Reichsführer leadership schools to teach adult Hitler Youth leaders how to run the government. Nazi racial propaganda, a slightly skewed version of German history, and physical and military-style training, such as rifle training, were all part of these schools' 3-week classes. The kids enjoyed being brainwashed. At the time, how you felt about the Hitler Youth might have been affected by how you were connected to it. According to history, The group's only goal was to psychologically and practically turn millions of German kids into good little Nazis. Time says that this was done by giving the members a very propaganda-friendly version of German history that focused on how bad the Nazis' racial ideas were and how great the German race was. Other subjects were filtered through a military lens. Nothing was thought to be important to learn unless it could be used in battle or warfare. Even more seriously, the Hitler Youth was meant to keep kids away from their parents. The older generations might not be fully Nazi enough, so the Nazis used the Hitler Youth to keep their kids away from them. Parents may not have liked the Hitler Youth, but a lot of kids did. That's because the kids didn't know that the group was using propaganda and influence for darker reasons. They were just having fun. A lot of people who used to be in Hitler Youth thought it was a fun way to camp and play with their friends, not a scary way to learn about fascism. The Hitler Youth was directly involved in the Holocaust. Even though the thought of millions of German boys being taught how to be good Nazis is very scary, it's safe to assume that the Hitler Youth were mostly good. Really, they were just some kids dressed up as Nazis and walking around in fake Boy Scout uniforms, right? Based on what the history place said, not so much. It's true that the happy kids in the Hitler Youth group hurt Jews and other minorities in Germany. When the Nazis carried out Kristallnacht, the infamous anti-Jewish massacre on November 9, 1938, the Hitler Youth voluntarily took part in the violence and damage. The kids didn't do it because someone told them to. They did it on their own. However, as time points out, that wasn't the only event. It is known that members of the Hitler Youth helped with many of the horrible things that were done to Jews. In Vienna, Hitler Youth members forced Jewish people to clean the streets with their toothbrushes and took part in attacks on temples that destroyed holy objects. There was no doubt that the kids were not okay. The Hitler Youth were forced to fight as a child army. The Hitler Youth has always been a very military group for young people. The program taught the boys how to shoot and march in a straight line while they wore outfits and trained like soldiers. According to History Extra, when the war ended in 1945 and things went badly for Germany, the desperate Nazi government started using Hitler's youth as emergency troops. They even went to schools and pulled kids out of class to make new military units as the Russians closed in on Berlin. In fact, history says that the Hitler Youth, which was made up of teenage boys, fought some of the hardest during the final push for the German city. It was even worse than it sounds that these kids had to fight because their enemies weren't always nicer to them because they were kids. The Soviet troops were especially careless about killing children after the brutal attack of the Soviet Union by Germany in 1943, according to Express. As they pushed for Berlin, Russian troops killed thousands of boys, but the Hitler Youth, who were forced to fight as soldiers, often had nowhere to go because German military police killed kids who were caught deserting. The Hitler Youth were a last gasp bit of propaganda. As Germany's defenses broke down and the Allies moved in to end the war, the Nazis turned to the Hitler Youth as a last-ditch effort. Young children as young as 10 were given guns and told to protect Berlin. Because the Nazi leaders are always looking for ways to spread really crazy ideas, they saw an opening. History Extra says that on April 20th, 1945, 10 days before he would kill himself and 12 days before Germany would submit, Adolf Hitler came out of his bunker to inspect the troops and present Iron Crosses, the highest military honor. He was clearly shaking and weak. His review troops, on the other hand, were all Hitler Youth between the ages of 10 and 14. History says that they got the award for being brave in their fight against the Soviets. But there was another reason. The event was quickly filmed and shown in Germany's few remaining theaters in an effort to make the country more determined to fight off the invaders. In a short speech, Hitler even said that he was still firmly convinced that we will achieve victory in this battle. But back in his bunker, things were not going well. Many of the Nazi leaders knew the war was already over. The Hitler Youth had a junior Gestapo. The Hitler Youth was specifically created to teach German kids not only fascist ideas, but also a society of fear and oppression. People in the group were told to tell on their parents and teachers if they did anything that was against Nazi doctrine. And to make sure that the kids never protested, the Hitler Youth was turned into a kind of junior secret police. Brenda Ralph Lewis, a historian, says that the HJ Streifendienst patrol force was a group of up to 70 boys who wore special outfits and were part of the Hitler Youth. These kids were in charge of making sure meetings ran smoothly and that the other kids behaved. Like the adult group they were based on, the Gestapo, they were also told to keep an eye on their peers and report any bad ideas or secret plans. The history place says it was even worse. The patrol force had to bring their work home and tell their parents about it. Because their own children told on their parents, some patrol force parents were arrested and sent to jail, and as a direct result, many patrol force members were promoted. There was resistance. A lot of Hitler Youth members were happy to join and learn how to be good Nazis, but there were also good reasons to join even if you weren't really a racist. BBC Bite-Size noted that members of the Hitler Youth were given special treatment when applying to college and jobs, which made them more likely to join. Even with these benefits and the huge push from friends to join, there was a surprising amount of opposition to the group. History Daily says that the Edelweiss Pirates, who over time gained thousands of members, were one of the most important anti-Hitler youth groups. The Pirates were made as a direct response to the Hitler Youth. The group was clearly against Nazism and provided a youth group that was free of violence and propaganda and centered on having fun and getting along with others. Over time, the Pirates started to do things against the Nazis, like destroying government buildings and officials' cars and even helping resistance groups. They also struck members of the Hitler Youth when they saw them. There were effects of this resistance. Numerous Edelweiss Pirates members were caught and killed because of what they did, as reported by history. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.